Every once in a while, when you drain the swamp, you kill off something you probably liked. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, there is a procurement specialist, a pricing director at the Pentagon whose name is Shay Assad, or at least there was such a man. He actually was rushed off into retirement under threat of being fired when some of the, I'll get into the details of how this happened, but in essence, let me tell you about this guy. He has saved the Pentagon billions of dollars over the years, not by his own account, but by the account of his colleagues within the Pentagon. And he was essentially let go or forced out last year because his boss, who's the director of weapons procurement, just failed to brief Congress on a reform program that he initiated. And then when Congress heard from the defense contractors about their objection to it, Congress, of course, was upset about that. And somebody had to go. So it might as well be Shay Assad. Bill, this story comes to us from Yahoo News, an expose that says basically that this guy who was something that President Trump would have loved, a deal maker. I want to read this quote because this is what he said. This is what Shay Assad said about the incoming president of the United States back in March of 2017. When you get somebody who's the president of the United States who understands precisely what you do for a living and understands how it's actually done, it becomes a pretty rewarding thing to do, especially when someone at the top is world class himself in terms of negotiating. Bill, how is it possible that during a Trump administration, a guy who loves President Trump's art of the deal had to hit the bricks?
Well, just for the sake of intellectual rigor, I'd be interested in hearing the case against him. And the only reason I'd be interested in hearing the case, because I'm pretty sure I know why he's fired, but the reason I'd be interested in hearing the case against him is because there may be elements to this story that we don't know. But since we don't know what we don't know, we'll just go ahead and assume that there was nothing else.
Let me
about
give you
this
a little bit against him, okay? Because this was kind of after the fact, after it was decided that he needed to be gone. It was leaked to the media through a Freedom of Information request and an interview that his commuting expenses were extraordinary because he lived in Boston and commuted to Washington, D.C. at the request of the boss who fired him. Mm-hmm. So it was put out there that more than $500,000 over a period of 7 years was spent getting him back and forth and housing him and feeding him, as he commuted to Washington, D.C. Now, the replacement for Shay Assad, when they finally appointed a replacement, is a guy from Ohio who's going to commute back and forth to Washington, D.C. That's the dirtiest dirt I can give you.
Yeah, there's a lot of stink about this. I don't want to sound, one of the most moving and infuriating things about reading history, especially about history of leaders and especially history of bad leaders like dictators, is this constant belief that, for instance, when people heard about the gas chambers or saw people being taken away, there were millions of Germans who said, I wonder if Hitler knows about this. If Hitler knew about this, he'd put it into it. Same thing for Stalin. That was said all the time. If only Stalin knew about all of these midnight arrests. So I wanted to preface what I'm about to say by not saying, by making it clear that this is a potential trap to fall into. But it doesn't sound to me like this kind of this particular situation is large enough to have gotten Donald Trump's attention, because if it did, I would have that man reinstated in a heartbeat. Not because he's a fan of Donald Trump, but in the world we live in today, it's not the world I want to live in, but in the world we live in today, hearing him praise Donald Trump gives me a strong sense of confidence that he wasn't working to undermine the president. And so we've seen a lot of public officials fired for that particular offense, and deservedly so. I think what we've got here from an initial scan of it is what it looks like. And that is, you've got a guy who's doing a public service. He's saving billions of dollars for the taxpayer. And if billions of dollars are not coming out of our pocket to buy something that we didn't need to buy, or to buy it at a more reasonable price, well, when you say he saved billions of dollars, those billions of dollars were going to go somewhere, weren't they? They were going to go somewhere. And so the people who are no longer in possession of billions of dollars that they would have gotten because of this guy's public service might have a reason to see a guy like that shown to the door.
Now, the reform effort that he was engaged in, by the way, involved two elements. Part of that was what is known in the Pentagon or in the Department of Defense as defective pricing. And that's basically an ongoing auditing process to make sure that when a contractor charges you for something, what he says he's charging you for is actually what's being delivered. And so they analyze this, and some figures, the figures vary in this, but in a very small sampling of contracts, they found that anywhere between $650 million and $900 million of savings could be had by correcting defective pricing. The other element, and you've probably heard of this before, is this idea of progress payments. Progress payments are made to defense contractors while the contract is underway in order to fund their production during the contract rather than waiting all the way till the end, and this can drag on for months or years, to pay them at the end. Now, these progress payments were put in place during a time when the going interest rate for a bank loan for a business was 12.5%, considerably less than that now. And so Shay Assad's assertion was they don't need to get these kinds of progress payments the way they used to. Let's just say we give them progress payments when they give us metrics of performance. So we only pay them the progress payments when we can measure the performance. Those are the two things that got him hustled out the door. And what you said earlier about his affection for President Trump might be borne out in this little speech he gave to the Bank of America shortly before his departure. I hear this is Shay Assad saying, I hear someone's looking for $1 to $5 billion, referring to the money that President Trump was seeking for his border wall. I'm pretty sure it's sitting over in the Defense Department as defective pricing and contract fraud if someone has the courage to go get it.
You know, I'm romantic by nature. I mean, I'm a dramatic guy by nature. But seriously, this is starting to look like we need to recreate a digital Jimmy Stewart to play this guy. You know, I mean, honestly, this sounds like the kind of public servant that we venerate in the ideal that almost never exists. For him to say that Congress is saying that we don't have the money to spend on this border wall, but I have already found enough money, me personally, to pay for the border wall many times over. Money's already been allocated. That sounds like a patriot to me. One of the things that is tough for patriotic Americans is to come face to face with the actual genuine corruption and shady dealings that go on with some elements of the Pentagon. Most of these programs all of these programs have their own officers of various ranks, usually generals appointed to this particular program. Let's take the F-35, for example. And it is heartbreaking to see people in uniform make decisions that protect their own careers and protect the companies that they're working with at the expense of the lives of American soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines. But it's true. The best example I know of was the example that Pierre Spray brought out regarding the M1 Abrams, the M2 Bradley fighting vehicle. The Bradley was commissioned, I want to say, in the 80s, and it was designed to replace the older armored personnel carriers that would take soldiers into combat. So they had a pretty good design for this thing, and there were problems. And Pierre Spray pointed out these problems. To give you an idea, I just want to set the stage for what's going on inside the Pentagon there. When Spray pointed out that these vehicles were defectively engineered and susceptible to explode, the Pentagon went on to test them. And one of the tests that the Pentagon did was to fire an RPG into the side of this Bradley. And what Pierre Spray found out was that during this test, which the Bradley passed with flying colors, the fuel tanks were not filled with diesel or gasoline fuel. The fuel tanks were filled with water. And that the RPG that was used was not a Chinese RPG, it was a Czech RPG, which had about a quarter of the explosive impact of the kind of warheads you'd normally see out there. So somebody, somewhere, some general gave orders that the tanks of this vehicle be filled with water and that a weakened charge be used on the rocket-propelled grenade so that this vehicle would pass a test, and that meant that any soldiers riding in this vehicle, which is going to be a lot of them, are in danger of being killed by weapons and by situations that this was designed to prevent. When you find out that actual people, I can understand business people doing this. When you find out that people in uniform who raised their right hand, swore to defend the Constitution of the United States, are ready to sacrifice the people under their command in order to protect their own butts, in order to protect their retirements, their consulting fees, and all of this stuff, it's enough to make you scream. But once again, we come back to the reality of the world. And the reality of the world is why we're conservatives. People are fallible. They have terrible flaws. We have to design a system that takes those into account and does the best we can. We'll never be perfect. The most we can hope for is to be good. So it is definitely possible. I've seen the cases of this kind of thing in front of my own eyes for this to be exactly precisely what it looks like. For businesses in the defense industry to be told that you're going to be getting less money. We're going to be more careful. We're going to be more strict about how you bill us. For those people then to say, well, if we're going to be more strict about how we bill them, then that means we're going to get to keep less money because we're overcharging them for things. Let's complain to the people we know in Congress. So the people in Congress who have ties with these defense industry people say, what's going on here? And then some miserable coward traitor in the Pentagon says, oh, it's this guy. He's the entire problem. This is the kind of thing that needs to be a national news story, and it's the kind of thing that needs to be written by a writer, not by a reporter, by a writer. A reporter needs to get the actual data and the actual facts, and then they need to hand a story like this over to a writer. And a writer can do what a reporter can't do, presumably, and that is not only make the legal justification for restoring this man and firing the people who had him fired, but also can connect to the absolute moral core of this, which is you've got a guy who's an American patriot, apparently, who is saving the taxpayers billions of dollars, and he's being thrown out on his butt to protect the guy who was supposed to be protecting him. It's tragic, it's noble, it's all these things, but I would love to make a federal case out of getting this guy reinstated.
Bill, there's another aspect. There's another aspect to this story, which again is at Yahoo News about Shay Assad. He says he's angry that he got forced into retirement, but he's even more angry that they haven't changed their procedures since he's left that office. And one of the things that he puts his finger on is the fact of this revolving door between the defense industry and the Defense Department. Ellen Lord, who is the deputy of the Defense Department, who's over procurement, who showed him the door, is actually a former top executive with Textron, a defense contractor. Mike Esper, who is the new Secretary of Defense, was Raytheon's leading lobbyist before he took this job. And Senator Elizabeth Warren, during his confirmation hearings, said she would vote no on his confirmation because he would not agree to recuse himself from cases involving his former employer, Raytheon. Bill, how can you staff the Department of Defense with expertise in areas of weapons procurement without risking the corruption that comes from this revolving door?
Well, you can't. You just can't. I never, ever in a million years thought it'd be possible that I would agree with Elizabeth Warren on something, but I agree with her on this one. As long as she's talking about deals specifically with Raytheon and not across the entire spectrum of defense contractors, that doesn't seem unreasonable to me for appropriate reasons. Look, the fundamental problem we have here is a much deeper one than this. It's not just individual cases of overcharging and individual cases of corruption or influencing. That's trivial, Scott. That's peanuts. I don't know what you say, $900 million. And by the way, can we just stop for 1 second and say that accounting errors or mistakes amounting to $650 million, can we just stop right there and realize that every single dollar in taxes that has ever been taken out of your wallet and every single dollar in taxes has been taken out of the wallet of every single person you know and every single person that they know, all of that money that was taken out of their wallets has disappeared in an accounting error.
And by the way, the people in the Defense Department, spokespeople for the Defense Department, when asked to comment on Shay Assad's claims, did not challenge the fundamentals of them, only the amount. Okay, so it's getting more and more formed up as we go. Here's the problem with defense procurement. And it's kind of a problem that was created by the snake trying to eat its own tail. In the 1960s,
when we were really moving fast in aerospace, where we were literally going faster and faster, world records, speed records, altitude records, being broken every couple of months out at Edwards Air Force Base. When new fighters were commissioned by the Air Force, when we said we need a fighter to do this, we've got a mission. Here's what we want the airplane to do. We want it to fly this high, this fast. We want it to have this kind of range. We want it to carry these kind of weapons and so on. In the 60s, what would happen is that announcement would go out to something like, I don't know, certainly 6 or 7, if not more, independent defense contractors, and each one of these people would assemble on their own dime a prototype. And then all of these prototypes would basically be gotten together and there would be a fly-off. They would have Air Force test pilots who are not company guys flying one jet, flying the next jet, flying the other jet, trying to determine which one of these jets was better. And this was a grand system because it got you the best possible product. It got you competition and it didn't hook the taxpayers with the costs of the losers. Now, that was long ago and far away. What we do now is the worst possible idea on earth, and this idea is called cost plus. So take an example. The F-35 has just gotten so much flack. Let's just take another example. Take an example of something the Pentagon wants. And let's say that it's worth $100 million. They've got $100 million to spend on this thing. It should be 100 billion, but let's just say 100 million because we're old fashioned. Okay, so they've got $100 million to spend on this thing. The way we buy things now is not to say, whichever one of you guys out there can turn out the best version of this, we're going to give you $100 million. It's not how it works. Now they find somebody who makes the best marketing case, the best sales case, and they basically give them the $100 million in installments. But here's the thing. They make a deal called cost plus. So here's how we buy stuff now in the Pentagon. We say to the company, well, probably the company says to us, all right, we're going to deliver 100 airplanes for $100 million. I'm just going to keep the math simple, if unrealistic. We need 100 airplanes. We got $100 million. Okay, great. We're going to do a cost plus deal, which means that if things get more expensive, then we're no longer going to get paid $100 million. If things are delayed by 2 years, we might get $130 million. If we run into cost overruns along the way that we don't anticipate, then we're going to add those costs onto the $100 million that you've already agreed to. And this is how we buy things. And just think about this. Think about this. Let's say you wanted to add an addition to your house. You wanted to put in an extra room on the south side. And you made a deal with a contractor. And the deal wasn't the contractor will add this extension to your house for $60,000. The deal was the contractor will agree to add this extension to your house for $60,000 and any delays or cost overruns will be paid by you. What do you think that incentivizes the contractor to do? If he gets more money, the longer he takes and the more expensive it gets, then you have completely incentivized these gigantic companies to not only take a decade to do work that used to be done in a year or two, but to furthermore make sure that every possible overrun is included because the more money that comes in is the more money they get. It's absolutely barking mad insane.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's just one department of our federal government, a big one at that, but it surely doesn't stop there. If you like these kinds of conversations, if you like holding government to account for what it is doing with your dollars, you're going to like being a member at BillWhittle.com. You can do that today. Join up with the others who are funding this program and making it possible for a lot of other people to see these conversations. We've had a lot of members, by the way, Bill, joining in the last couple of weeks at that producer level, which is actually the highest level. And the odd thing about that is they don't get any more benefits than the person who's paying $9.95 a month when they pay $49.95 a month. What they get is the knowledge that they are helping to provide this material around the world for people who are not paying. And we are grateful for their beneficence and for their devotion to this cause. If you'd like to become one of them, go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.